For the next 3 hours, I listened with so biting an intrigue at what had happened within the walls of that orphanage, and was even further transfixed when later my father's name came into play. A deformed character answering to the name of John Michael, after having been ridiculed and taunted for his deformity, sought refuge from this world at the bottom of certain wishing wells in our town. One spring, one of the nuns from the orphanage sat at the edge of one of these wells wishing for happiness in the world, and tossing the penny into the blackness, stumbled upon eyes. She called to them and asked them if they were hurt, but the eyes replied,
"No, I am only hiding. I too wish for this happiness, but will wait here in my abyss until this happiness has been achieved."
"But don't you understand," insisted the nun, "that you must strive with your ways to make this world a better place? You must take action instead of solitude. I will help you out of this well, dear brother." The nun gathered her sisters, and when they pulled John Michael from the murky bottom of those depths, they immediately understood his reason for being so wary of man. He was horrid to look at, the most perverse of any malignancy they had ever witnessed. His eyes, too large for the head that they nearly fell out of the skull, and the hair on his bottom so thick and coarse and long, and his teeth, so few in the head, so wretchedly brown they appeared as those of a demonic rabbit, and the fingers, poor man, so long and so bony that they were not at all pleasant to view, as though tentacles with claws, and the skin, gray and thin, exposing his intestines, his mind, his heart. But in their beauty and charm the nuns could see no deformity, and offered him their basement in the orphanage, for which he could apply his hiding from vindictive eyes. At this time in the orphanage, there was a debate swinging and growing bitter daily. Half of the nuns were against the striking of a child, and the other half thought it was the best possible way to change his disrespectful days. Then one of the nuns started plotting processes in the mind that can indeed lead to penalty. On a Sunday in winter, one of the boys was behaving badly, and the nun watching over him had gone quite impatient with his sour display.
"If you don't stop this madness right now and behave yourself,
Here came the test. Try it now.
I'll take you down to the basement." "Fine, take me to the basement. It's too cold out here."
The child laughed in the playground twist, the snow falling onto his even colder smile.
But you know what is down there?" "Obviously not. There is a monster down there with a taste for living flesh who is always begging me to bring him a nasty little boy for supper."
The child then began to claim that the nun would surely go to hell for such lies, and the nun, in such a wonderful display of aggression, picked up the child and began carting him off the playground, his little feet dragging in the snow as he fought and clamored so. Within seconds, nearly strangling the boy as she struggled with him, the nun pulled the boy into the orphanage, down the long corridor at the farthest end of the building, down the steps that led to the basement. The child did nothing but fight and shout how he did not believe in monsters. But there, just before the cellar door, though, did he begin to wonder, for at his height he could peek through the keyhole. And there, staring at him, was a huge blue eye. And on the other side of the door, he could hear the heavy thud of improper breathing, wrangled breath that had caused the imagination to grow wild in the tot's little mind. The breathing sounded as though there was something stuck in the monster's throat, a bone perhaps, the small piece of a boy who also had misbehaved. Coughing and muttering were beginning to sound from the other side of the basement door. Hunger, the taste of a boy who had been naughty, something like a craving, an addiction.
"Sister,"
said John Michael through the most grotesque tongue of raspy, heavy sputter,
"have you brought me a friend to play with?"
The child began to cry and plead for forgiveness, but the nun still felt he had not learned his lesson.
"Don't struggle like that,"
She shouted to the boy.
"He will only want you more."
And with that, she threw open the door, and there stood John Michael in all his deformed glory. The child, his heart nearly ceasing, screamed a shriek unlike any noise ever known to penetrate the ear of man, ran up the staircase into his bedroom, and crawled beneath his bed, where he stayed for a fortnight. And the child was a perfect angel henceforth. Success, thought the nuns. They would never have to strike at a child again, but when one grew in need of a lashing, they would threaten him with the hungry monster in the basement. This successful system of punishment worked for some time until John Michael took to abducting the little boys by night. Oh yes, if they had been bad, they would be taken down to view the site of the man's monstrosity, but later in the night, John Michael would creep up the staircase, return to that same boy and carry him down to his lair, and there he would perform unspeakable things. Their misery screamed unimaginable things, and these vile things are far too wretched for me to discuss, much less pen for my daughter. The nuns finally caught John Michael in his trickery, alas, only after 2 years of this mad practice had been made upon the babes. Only after 2 years of the most grueling, sadistic torture had been performed on the little boys. Their young minds had been damaged for good. Their eyes no longer shined, their smiles no longer the promise of childhood. The nuns, terrified at what they had provoked, beat and whipped the disfigured man in a rage of guilt and shame. His skin was far too thin to withhold the lashing, though, and he fell to the floor dead. But the sun was coming. People were mingling in the abbey grounds, and the children were beginning to wake. Later that night they would remove his remains in a hard cardboard box, they agreed. And sure enough, some moments after midnight, John Michael was laid to rest at the dirtiest edge of the cemetery with nothing more than 2 twigs fashioned into a cross to claim as his grave.